Which should you play, Torchlight Infinite or Path of Exile? Because on the surface, both games do seem to have a lot in common with each other. However, when you look a little deeper, they can also be quite different. And it's important to remember they are different games. I think there's going to be a lot of audience overlap either way. But, just like how they're different games, they're also intended for slightly different audiences. So today, I'm going to be comparing and contrasting both, and giving my thoughts so that you can decide whether you play one, both, or maybe even neither. And so let's get started with that topic of audience. I don't think game developers sit there and say, we only want these specific people to play our games, but they definitely have a rough idea of the player in mind when they're making a product. And this is the point of greatest divergence between the two games. PoE is a hardcore game for a hardcore audience. While some people can definitely enjoy it casually, it's not built for mass market appeal. As a result, PoE has an insanely high skill ceiling, which can be expressed in various forms. You can become a master crafter, and make thousands of exalts or even dozens of mirrors per league. Maybe that's a master crafter and master trader. Or you can race and go super fast. Maybe you just like playing solo self-found hardcore, and surviving the challenge that the game has to offer. All of these things are very skill-based, and all of them can be quite tricky to master. All of this comes at the cost of PoE having a much higher skill floor than most games, think something like Dark Souls. And PoE has very passionate devs who love the game, and want to design the best gameplay experience for their players. Torchlight Infinite, on the other hand, is a mobile and PC crossplay game. As a result, it's much easier to jump into and out of, so it's a lot more conducive to casual play, where you might play for a couple hours, stick your items on the auction house, and come back later. And in this regard, I do think Torchlight Infinite has more potential for mass appeal. Similarly, it also has a lower skill floor. It's easier to get into, but that comes at the cost of a lower skill ceiling. You'll run out of things to master a little bit faster than with Path of Exile. And Torchlight Infinite has passionate devs who love the game and want to design the best gameplay experience for players. So if you want a strictly casual game, something that you play for 1 or 2 hours a day, or maybe for a few hours on your weekends, I'd very much recommend Torchlight Infinite. Whereas if you want something to learn and master and really get into the weeds on, then I'd suggest Path of Exile. But in both cases, do remember it's healthy to take breaks, so honestly, you could always try both if you want, since I do think most players sit in between the two extremes I just outlined. Another similarity is both are ARPGs inspired by Diablo, and in comparison to most other ARPGs, they offer a relatively fast pace of gameplay where you kill a lot of monsters in a very short time. But PoE is very much a game built on difficulty, permanence, and consequences for your choices. If you make good decisions, then good things will happen. If you make bad decisions, bad things will happen. Because your choices matter, they often carry over for a significant amount of time. If you make a mistake, you might feel the effects for hours, having to grind to reverse the consequences of your bad decision. Or of course, your character might die instantly, and then you'll lose a bit of EXP. PoE is also a game built on difficulty, which can make it both very frustrating and also very rewarding. If you want to know more about difficulty in games, Adam Millard recently came up with a brilliant video essay on the topic, which I'll put in the video card, as I do think it's a great reference resource when you're wanting to examine difficulty and gaming. I tried to take a stab at this a while back, and honestly, he just did a better job than I ever could have. And PoE is also a game that's going through a lot of change right now. With the upcoming launch of Path of Exile 2, the game's biggest patch to date, GGG is doing a lot to modernize systems, and there are some growing pains as a result. On the other hand, Torchlight Infinite is built far less on permanence, so it's a lot easier to make a mistake and then almost instantly undo it. This is good if you're just learning and making a lot of mistakes, but this is maybe bad because you'll be more likely to repeat those mistakes as you don't necessarily learn your lesson the first time. And while Torchlight Infinite still does have challenging content, there's many builds that can't do Path of the Brave 5 or Uber Keegan. It definitely doesn't feel like it's challenging to the point of Path of Exile, meaning it's going to be a less frustrating experience, but you might not have those super rewarding moments where you spend hour after hour after hour mastering something and finally succeed. Finally, Torchlight Infinite is a brand new game. In fact, it's still in open beta, and as a result, it's somewhat similar to PoE in that it has some growing pains to go through, before I think it'll be in a really great spot, especially in the case of some localization issues leading to things being a little more confusing than they should be. So overall, I do think both are excellent games, and they provide interesting takes on the Diablo-like genre. Path of Exile is better at providing a long-term challenge and a long-term grind, but Torchlight Infinite is better as a learning experience. In some ways, I almost see it as if you want to get into PoE, but are kind of worried about making mistakes, then play Torchlight Infinite, and move on to PoE later. After a season or two, you'll have more than enough experience to jump in and master PoE systems with relative ease, at least compared to before. But of course, if you're going to be killing a lot of monsters, you need a good build. And this is something where both games offer somewhat interesting choices. There's a ton of build diversity in both. You leverage the mechanics of ascendancies or hero traits and combine them with powerful items. But they treat these things a little bit differently. In Path of Exile, the most powerful items are very often rares, and they won't really be dropping on the ground. Instead, you're going to have to make them with the game's crafting system. More about that later, but this does mean it's not going to be for everyone, because instead of a build being a cookie-cutter combination of orange legendaries, you kind of have to make it yourself with the rares at your disposal. And some people can find this to be a bit challenging. Also, PoE systems are all based on tags and keywords. They seem very obscure at first, but if you can really learn and master this, the rest of the game will get a lot easier for you. And finally, choices matter in PoE, so respeccing is moderately expensive. As a result, many people will more often feel locked into their choices. In Torchlight Infinite, on the other hand, many of the most powerful items are legendaries. You'll start with legendaries and build the rest of your gear around them. It's going to be very rare for you to craft an item and use that as the core centerpiece of your build. Torchlight Infinite also has a tag-based system, but unfortunately, due to some of the growing pains I mentioned earlier with the OBT, there are still inconsistencies in translation and wording. So you will have to be a little bit careful. It's not that the underlying code is bad or inconsistent, but the words might not mean what you think they do. And in Torchlight Infinite, respecs are relatively easy. They're completely free up until character level 80, and from 81 on you will have to use Oblivion points, but they kind of drop like candy, so this won't really be too big of an issue. The main problem when swapping builds is actually reselling your old gear. But how do you make that gear? Well, with the crafting system. Most of the currencies in both Path of Exile and Torchlight Infinite are also crafting materials. Chaos, Exalt, and Divine, all crafting materials. Ember and Flame Fuel, again, crafting materials. So many of the best items are made, not found. Path of Exile has a lot of different crafting methods, each of which do different things. Essences, beast crafting, fossils, harvest, etc. So as a result, many people find crafting to be unapproachable in Path of Exile. However, those who do take the time to learn and really master crafting have a massive economic advantage over everyone else. If someone's struggling to make 10 divines in a week, you'll probably be making 10 divines in a few minutes if you've truly mastered crafting and you're able to combine all the different methods to leverage the market. If this sounds exciting to you, then I very much suggest checking out Path of Exile. If this sounds like hell to you, then maybe check out Torchlight Infinite. More so than anything else in Path of Exile, PoE's crafting system is very much skill-based. While there are some items where you can kind of follow a recipe and just go through the instructions for a relatively similar result every time, much of the rest of the crafting is the minute-to-minute decision-making. And this is because, even though PoE has ways to go back and revert an item to an earlier state, lowering the number of mods, you generally don't want to craft just one item. You want to start with multiple bases, and then craft to aim for your desired result, and sell the things that didn't quite make what you wanted along the way. Sometimes you'll be surprised and find that you make something so valuable that you could sell it and easily buy what you want 2 or 3 times over. Torchlight Infinite, on the other hand, has one main crafting method, which uses embers and flame fuel. This will add various modifiers to items. However, Torchlight Infinite doesn't let you really go back. Instead, it lets you decide, do I want to advance the state of the item or keep it the same? If you choose to keep it the same, you can just try again. The only cost is more embers and more flame fuel. If you choose to add the mod, there's really no way to go back. So on the one hand, there's more permanence, but on the other hand, you can just wait to accept what you actually want. Don't settle here, otherwise you might have some regrets. Which means that crafting projects in Torchlight Infinite are usually built up over time. You're only making one item and you're slowly adding to it and perfecting it. What this means is in Path of Exile, there's usually a lot of duplicate items in the market. So if you're looking for something for a popular build, you'll usually have a wealth of options. On the other hand, in Torchlight Infinite, there tends to be less items in the market. This is a side effect of more people not discarding their old things. However, it should be noted at the very top end, there is the corrosion mechanic. Think of it like volleying something in Path of Exile. You corrupt it and you can get some super powerful mods, including bumping T1 mods up to the T0. So there is somewhat of a secondary item market created as a result. Rich and powerful players will want to farm up and make the super perfect items by corroding things, and if they don't hit what they want, they'll sell it to try to recoup the cost, usually for less than it costs to actually make the item itself. In this case, the games are honestly pretty similar, but personally I do prefer Path of Exile's crafting system due to the additional complexity, as it really feels like an achievement to figure out a tricky craft. And while I have enjoyed my crafting in Torchlight Infinite, I haven't gotten that feeling quite yet. Next up, I want to talk about the endgame, the economy, and some long-term perspectives of the game. Before I do though, a quick reminder that if you're 10 minutes into a video, you probably like it, and you should probably go down and hit the like button to tell YouTube that, both so it can show you more videos that you'll like, and also to show this video to more people. While you're down there, do be sure to get subscribed. For more content, check out the resources I have in the card, which will be up at the top right. And before I get back to things, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. More about how you can support at the end. For now, what is the endgame? Well, the basis of the endgame in both is a fairly simple loop. You run maps to get drops to run more maps to get more drops. PoE's Atlas passives offer a high degree of customization, but it's quite easy these days to make the content too difficult for your current gear or current character. PoE also offers a lot of other side activities, things like Heist, Delve, Simulacrum, Blighted Maps, Atlas Memories, and Legion 5-Ways. After all, PoE has had nearly a decade of development. And PoE offers multiple endgame bosses, including Uber versions such as the Uber Maven or Uber Elder. These are challenging and, unfortunately in a lot of cases, not as rewarding as they could be, but that's a story for a different day. Torchlight Infinite, on the other hand, uses the Chaos and Trait card system to help break up the tedium of mapping. But overall, even T7 and 8 content is relatively easy for a good build with decent gear. You can swap the cards fairly frequently, so again, you have more freedom of choice on a moment-to-moment basis, at the cost of less overall permanent power. In terms of side activities, currently all Torchlight Infinite has is Path of the Brave, a wave-based arena mode, though hopefully more will come with future seasons. And currently Torchlight Infinite has two major bosses, Traveler and Keegan, both of which also have an Uber version. Personally, I do quite like the Uber Traveler, I think it's a great fight, and I don't really like Uber Keegan because the visual clarity honestly could be improved, and it's really hard to see sometimes. But again, I think it's important to remember that when it comes to content, PoE has over a decade of development. It's always going to have more content than a game that just came out like Torchlight Infinite. For many people though, they say that PoE has too much content, so Torchlight Infinite should be easier to get into since, while there is less content, that also means you have less choices, so you're less likely to be overwhelmed. Trading and economy is another point of great divergence for these games. Both are built around trading with other players. Both have chase items that you're unlikely to see within your playtime, so you'll want to grind for and earn bit by bit or purchase from another player. And as a result, the goal is for both to have a robust economy with super endgame or maybe even game-breaking chase items, things like Headhunter, Mageblood, Eternity, Memory. Path of Exile uses direct player-to-player trading with intentionally introduced friction, so players really need to choose if an item is worth their time to pick up or not. While I know this is one of the most hated things about Path of Exile, it's also actually done an amazing job of insulating players from many of the problems introduced by auction house-based systems such as rampant inflation. PoE also has no fixed currency system. All value is set by player demand, so the fact that someone chooses to not pick up an item because it's not worth their time does actually mean that for a person who picks it up, that item is worth more. And finally, one of the best ways to make massive amounts of currency in PoE is just by trading. Torchlight Infinite, on the other hand, uses an auction house for asynchronous trading, which, given that it's mobile and PC, does make a lot of sense. It also has auto loot that picks up a lot of the basic consumables, and unfortunately, one version of auto loot ignores your loot filter, and this is where some of the game's current problems get involved. Because while there are a lot of opportunities to make money by trading in Torchlight Infinite, it does feel a little held back by the very clunky mobile-centric trade house UI. And because so many of the basic materials are picked up automatically by auto loot, what that really means is they get devalued very quickly. to the point where a top endgame player is picking up thousands of flame sand, therefore flame sand is worth a lot less to everyone else who's just trying to get their build up and running and desperately needs the flame elementium. But similarly, that player who gets thousands of flame sand and is crashing the market on common items might want to buy something like an eternity, and they're much more efficient at farming, so the price of eternity goes up. Right now, Torchlight Infinite's auction house, being trade tariff free, is resulting in a bit of an economic crisis, though I think I'll have an upcoming video breaking that down in more detail. For now, it's safe to say that Path of Exile's trading might annoy you, but it really does create an amazing economy for the game. Torchlight Infinite's will be a lot easier, but you do have to go into it with a grain of salt, knowing that early on a lot of the stuff you pick up, unless it's the start of a season, might not be worth very much. But what about the value of your dollar? How do both of these games monetize? As free-to-play games, both PoE and Torchlight Infinite need ways to make money and continue sustaining their development, but games should do this fairly and treat their players well. PoE's primary monetization is via stash tabs. This almost functions as a unlimited free trial and then a box price to buy the game, which adds up to about $40 US. Now, I'm not too familiar with regional pricing here, but it may also exist. Feel free to chime in on the comments if you happen to know about that. Path of Exile also offers a wide range of cosmetics, including a battle pass for each league and cosmetic loot boxes. And finally, Path of Exile offers supporter packs, which are kind of a way to double dip. You'll usually spend something like $60 and get $60 in points plus some free cosmetics on top of that. Or sometimes you'll get $55 in points and then the $5 cosmetic set that comes with a supporter pack, which both encourages people to spend a little bit more and also makes you feel like you get quite a bit for your money. Torchlight Infinite's primary monetization, on the other hand, is via its Battle Pass, which functions effectively as a $15 per season subscription. You'll get the new character, you'll get some extra trade space, and you'll get the advanced auto loot, the one that picks things up ignoring your loot filter. This part is honestly very fair and reasonable. Torchlight Infinite also sells stash space, though for the most part you can just get that for free by playing the game, trade space, which is on a per season basis, and pets. Now, pets are definitely the most controversial part, since technically they do add in-game power, but in most cases it's a tiny, arguably irrelevant amount. So while it does definitely raise a lot of complaints, and I'd certainly prefer if they didn't exist, if you're wondering, are pets gonna make the game feel bad to me as a free player? Not at all. If you buy the Battle Pass, you probably won't be able to tell the difference between yourself as a complete free-to-play with Battle Pass and someone who spent $20,000 or $30,000 US on pets. Though, for more details on that, I will have a video in the card talking about Torchlight Infinite's monetization in more detail. Of course, Torchlight Infinite is a relatively new game. Whereas PoE has developed its monetization over almost a decade, Torchlight Infinite is in open beta, so there may be some changes going from open beta to full release. Hopefully what this means is moving away from randomized systems, allowing for a few more things to be earned through gameplay rather than strictly purchased, and who knows, maybe they'll get rid of the pets offering in-game power entirely. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but given that loot box legislation is picking up in several regions, it's not entirely impossible either. So overall, PoE definitely has better monetization here, but at the same time, I don't think a $15 per 3-month subscription is at all unreasonable. And again, the pets won't really get in the way of your gameplay, so while they are a giant sore thumb that sticks out, they don't really actually cause any problems. There's no broken bones there, it's just going to hurt for a couple days. And also, to be fair, while they are cosmetic, PoE does still use loot boxes, so they do lose some points there, and hopefully loot box legislation will force them to remove those as well at some point in the future. Personally, I think that selling tabs or selling hero traits is perfectly reasonable. Paying $40 as a box price or paying $15 per 3 months is a great way to sustain the game and support the devs who make something that you deeply love and play for dozens if not hundreds of hours. And finally, I'd say don't judge a book by its cover, but I'm sure plenty of people will do that anyway. So how does it feel to hold that theoretical book, which is my analogy for a video game? PoE has done a lot over the years to improve its clunkiness, especially since Legion, but there are still some quirks here or there. In general, one thing that sets PoE apart from most other games is its bosses have great audio cues. Even if the visuals are a bit muddy and you can't see everything that's going on, you can hear it, which is something not enough games do these days. And PoE is set in a gritty, bloody, grimdark fantasy world. Torchlight Infinite, on the other hand, has some clunkiness related to certain skills, probably from being ported over from mobile, but aside of that, is an absolute delight to play. It feels super fast and super smooth due to the liberal use of animation cancelling. On the other hand, Torchlight Infinite bosses are a little bit mixed. Some, like Keegan, are visually muddy and unclear. Others are great like Traveler. I'd certainly love to have some audio cues here. And in terms of graphics, TLI uses a bright and simple graphical style that does feel like it fits with a whole Torchlight aesthetic, at least from what I remember of my very short time playing Torchlight 2. So, which game is better? Well, I kind of gave it away at the start. If you're strictly looking for something to play casually, maybe 1 to 2 hours a day, then definitely go for Torchlight Infinite. And if you're looking for the most challenging game possible in ARPG history, then definitely jump into Path of Exile and check out the game's upcoming Ruthless mode, which is the most brutal ARPG experience I've ever heard of, and definitely won't be for most people. And that's the thing. For most people, I don't think it's a one or the other answer here. I think most people who like PoE will find some aspects of Torchlight Infinite they enjoy, and most people who play Torchlight Infinite will enjoy some aspects of Path of Exile. Like I said at the start, it's always healthy to take breaks from the games that you play a lot of. So I'd suggest playing both at the start of a league or the start of a season, enjoying the new content, and when you start getting bored or feeling a little burnt out, move on, play the other, or maybe play something else entirely. But what do you think? Do you plan to play Torchlight Infinite in the future? Or maybe you're going to get back into Path of Exile? And of course, there's always the option to do both. Let me know some of those thoughts down in the comments below. And before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. If you want to join the conversation for yourself, then you can do so by hopping into my Discord with the link below and reacting to give yourself a community role. Or you can stick around and watch one of the videos that I put in the card, or YouTube's recommendation, which will be on screen right now. If you're really bored after that, and you want even more content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, where I also have a variety of video essays. Though, again, they're definitely nowhere near as good as Adam Millard's. I know very often in games, things get super tribal. You must only play World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. But that's honestly not how I see PoE and TLI. I think most people will enjoy both. And who knows? Maybe this will become a weird love triangle once D4 gets added to the mix. But more about that in a future video.